Hold on. Just a little further.
Eleanor?
Nathaniel, thank God. Stay with me.
The river went silent 3 minutes before it tried to kill him. Eleanor Reed had spent 28 years beside the River Wren and she had never trusted sudden peace. Water always spoke. It pulled at the ferry ropes, struck the wooden posts beneath the landing, carried reeds past the mill, and complained against every stone in its path. That afternoon it stopped. The mill wheel slowed until its paddles hung almost motionless. Birds rose abruptly from the riverbank, scattering toward the hills while the ferry rope sagged in. Something had blocked the water upstream. Perhaps mud. Perhaps fallen trees. Perhaps half-a. Whatever held it would not hold for long. Across the river, a stranger stepped into a narrow skiff and placed a leather case beneath the. "Do not leave the bank," Eleanor shouted. He looked toward her. His dark coat was expensive, his boots poorly suited to mud. And his expression carried the quiet impatience of a man accustomed to having warnings explained to him. "The crossing is closed," she called. He glanced at the still water. "It appears unusually calm. That is why you must get out. I need to reach Alderwick before evening. And I would prefer not to drag your body from the reeds." His eyebrows lifted, but instead of obeying, he untied the boat and pushed away from the opposite bank. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. Then the sound came. It began as a distant rumble beyond the hills, low enough to be mistaken for a cart crossing. Within seconds, it deepened into a roar that shook the landing beneath her boots. The stranger turned upstream. The river appeared around the bend as a wall of brown water carrying branches, broken fencing, and pieces of hillside. "Turn back," Eleanor shouted. He pulled hard on one oar, but the skiff swung sideways. The first surge struck its hull and threw him into the water. Eleanor seized the second boat. The current caught her before she had pushed clear of the landing. She fought to keep the bow facing upstream while the flood dragged her toward the lower. The stranger surfaced once, disappeared beneath a branch, then rose again several yards away. Eleanor rowed across the current and reached for him. Her fingers closed around the back of his coat. "Take the side of the boat." He tried, but the water tore his hand away. She looped the ferry rope around her wrist, caught his arm again, and leaned backward with all her strength. The boat tilted dangerously before he managed to grip the gunwale. Together they were carried past the flooded dock and into a line of willow trees, where Eleanor used an oar to guide them toward the shallows. The skiff struck the muddy bank. The stranger did not move. Eleanor dragged him from the water, pressed her ear near his mouth, and felt a faint breath against her cheek. "Thomas," she shouted toward the village. "Bring help." A thin boy came running from the upper road, followed by 2 fishermen. They carried the stranger toward the Reed family's inn while Eleanor returned to the river. She warned the families nearest the bank, secured every boat she could reach, and helped move an elderly couple to higher ground. Only after the church bell confirmed that every villager had been accounted for did she enter the inn. The stranger lay beside the kitchen fire with a bandage around his forehead. Her mother stood nearby, wringing river water from his coat. "He woke once," Mrs. Reed said. "His name is Nathan Hale." The man opened his eyes. They were grey and alert despite the exhaustion in his face. "You saved my life. You ignored mine." The corner of his mouth moved. "I believe that makes us poorly introduced." Eleanor handed him a cup of warm broth. "What brings you to Alderwick, Mr. Hale?" "I am a surveyor. For the reservoir." He paused. Only briefly, but Eleanor noticed. Yes. The proposed reservoir had begun as a rumor whispered in the market. Then engineers arrived with measuring chains and colored stakes. Finally, official maps appeared showing Alderwick beneath a wide blue shape. The growing city of Calder needed water. The authorities had decided the village could disappear to provide it. Nathan remained at the inn because the bridge had been damaged and the lower road was buried beneath mud. During the following 2 days, he watched Eleanor work. She checked the homes of widows before inspecting her own ferry. She knew which family had lost firewood, which child feared deep water, and which fisherman kept medicine in a cupboard now damaged by the flood. Nathan had read reports describing the villagers as hostile and unreasonable. He saw no hostility. He saw people frightened that strangers with maps had already decided their homes were worth less than a distant city's convenience. On the second afternoon, Eleanor found him trying to repair the ferry landing. He had tied the rope into an elaborate but useless knot. "What is that?" she asked. He watched as she untied his work and began again. "You find this amusing? I find it concerning that a surveyor cannot tie a working knot. My profession requires measurements, not boats. Yet you crossed a dangerous river after the ferryman's daughter told you not to. You make an unforgiving argument. You survived it." Nathan smiled, and for the first time, Eleanor noticed that his seriousness was not coldness. It was discipline worn so long that he had almost forgotten how to set it aside. They worked together until the afternoon light began to fade. "How did you know the flood was coming?" he asked. "The current stopped. The birds left. The mill wheel slowed. You learned that from your father? And from the river. Knowledge does not become less true because no university placed a seal beneath it." Nathan looked toward the village. "The engineers believe this valley is the safest location for the reservoir." "The cheapest," Eleanor corrected. "Those are not the same thing." That evening, she showed him the survey maps pinned inside the inn. Red lines crossed cottages, workshops, the school, the church, and the burial ground. "They call Alderwick an almost empty valley," she said. "They counted buildings and acres. They did not count lives." Beside the official maps hung an older drawing made by Eleanor's father. A narrow channel curved through the northern hills, passing across a wooded estate marked with one familiar name. Ashbourne. Nathan's expression changed. "What is that line? An abandoned watercourse?" "My father believed it could divert water around the village." "Why was it rejected?" "The engineers said the land was protected." Nathan knew exactly what that meant. The northern woods belonged to his family. They surrounded an ornamental lake and a hunting estate his father had treated as sacred inheritance. Late that night, after the inn had fallen quiet, Nathan locked his bedroom door and opened the leather case beneath his bed. Inside lay his royal appointment as supervisor of the reservoir project. Beneath it rested the order authorizing Alderwick's evacuation. Only one signature was missing. Nathaniel Ashbourne, Duke of Ashbourne. Outside his window, Eleanor stood beside a damaged cottage, helping a widow repair a broken wall by lantern light. Nathaniel lifted his pen. He had arrived believing his duty was to decide how gently the village should be taken. For the first time, he wondered whether he had any right to take it at all. Nathaniel did not sign the evacuation order. Instead, he folded it beneath the royal appointment and locked both documents inside his case. And told himself he needed more evidence before making a decision. It was an honest explanation. It was not the whole truth. The following morning he informed Mrs. Reed that the damaged bridge would delay his departure for several more days. She accepted the news with little enthusiasm and assigned him the smallest room at the back of the inn. Eleanor was less polite. "The road to Calder remains open," she said. "A man determined to leave could hire a horse. A surveyor should examine the damage before reporting it. A surveyor who nearly drowned because he ignored local knowledge should examine many things." Nathaniel followed her to the ferry landing. The flood had torn away half the lower platform, leaving broken boards and twisted ropes along the bank. Eleanor worked with Thomas Bell and two fishermen to salvage what could be reused. Nathaniel removed his coat and joined them without being asked. By midday, his hands were blistered. Eleanor noticed but said nothing until he tried to conceal the damage beneath his cuffs. "You hold a saw as though it has personally offended you. I was taught other skills." "Such as?" Nathaniel considered the question. "Reading contracts. Managing accounts. Disappointing committees. That last one may soon become useful." He looked at her, but she had already returned to the damaged rail. During the days that followed, Eleanor showed him the Alderwick that did not appear in official reports. She took him to the schoolhouse where 30 children shared books repaired so many times that more thread than leather held them together. She introduced him to Mrs. Bell, whose husband had died in a quarry accident and whose lease offered no compensation if the reservoir displaced her. At the boatyard, 6 families worked together because none could afford equipment alone. Nathaniel saw the churchyard on the hill where generations of Alderwick residents were buried beneath weathered stones. "The engineers say the graves can be moved," he said. Eleanor stopped beside her father's. "They speak of moving the dead because they have never had to ask permission from the living." Nathaniel had no answer. The official plans described relocation as a practical matter. New cottages would be built several miles away. Families would receive compensation according to the value of their present homes. But value, he began to understand, was being measured by people who had never depended on a neighbor's tools. A shared boat, or a sister who lived 3 doors away. A cottage could be replaced. A village could not. That evening, Nathaniel sat with Eleanor outside the inn while Mrs. Reed closed the shutters. The river moved steadily again, dark beneath the fading light. "My father used to say that responsibility required sacrifice," Nathaniel said. "Whose sacrifice?" "The individual's, when something greater was at stake." Eleanor looked toward the opposite bank. "And who decides which lives are individual and which cause is greater?" Nathaniel pondered the question silently. If he answered as Duke Ashbourne, he'd say the government was there to make such decisions. That Calder's factories employed thousands and needed water. That refusing the reservoir might lead to disease, unemployment, and unrest. But Eleanor wasn't asking if the city mattered. She was asking why Alderwick was chosen before anyone considered taking land from the wealthy. "I do not know," he admitted. "That's more honest than most officials have been." Her voice softened, and the distance between them seemed to shrink. Nathaniel wanted to tell her who he really was. Each day he delayed made the truth heavier, yet each day also gave him another reason to fear what would happen. When she found out, he had come to Alderwick to see if its people were truly unreasonable. Eleanor had let him into their homes, shown him their vulnerabilities, and trusted him with her father's memory. The knowledge no longer felt like information. It felt stolen. 2 days later, Thomas came running from the northern woods, mud on his boots and excitement in his voice. "I found one of the old stones." He led Eleanor and Nathaniel along an overgrown path above the village. Beneath ivy and moss stood a waist-high boundary marker carved with a faded water symbol. A shallow depression ran through the trees, nearly hidden beneath decades of leaves. "An old channel," he said. "It could carry water around the valley, perhaps during floods." A reservoir system would need widening stone reinforcements and a control gate. Eleanor looked at him. "That's quite a detailed opinion for just a surveyor." Nathaniel sensed the danger in her words. Before he could respond, hoofbeats echoed along the way. A procession of carriages arrived in Alderwick that afternoon. Engineers, clerks, and uniformed officials gathered outside the church under Sir Malcolm Vane's direction. Malcolm greeted Nathaniel with a slight bow, carefully hidden from the villagers. "Mr. Hale," he said. "I trust your independent observations have been useful." Nathaniel understood the warning. "Not here. Not yet." Inside the church, Malcolm presented the latest reservoir plans. Blue ink covered Alderwick from the lower bridge to the churchyard. Several villagers protested when they saw their homes beneath the proposed waterline. Eleanor brought her father's map to the front. "There's another route through the northern woods." Malcolm barely glanced at it. "A family sketch is not an engineering survey. The channel exists." "We found the marker. Country stories and moss-covered stones don't supply a city with water." "You rejected the route before inspecting it." Malcolm's smile remained courteous. "The Ashbourne land is unsuitable." Nathaniel knew that was false. The route was more expensive but not impossible. It crossed the hunting grounds, required the loss of an ornamental lake, and would reduce the value of several Ashbourne properties. Eleanor turned toward him. "You saw the channel." Every face in the church followed her gaze. Nathaniel could have supported her then. He could have revealed his name, stopped the meeting, and ordered a full survey. Instead, he told himself that accusing Malcolm without written proof would allow the engineer to bury the alternative permanently. "We need proper measurements," he said carefully. Disappointment entered Eleanor's expression. Malcolm seized the advantage. "Quite right. Fortunately, final authority does not rest with villagers or junior surveyors." He faced the crowd. The Crown appointed one man to approve the project. His Grace, Duke Nathaniel Ashbourne. Then Malcolm turned toward Nathaniel. The church became silent. Eleanor did not move. Nathaniel stepped forward, each pace widening the distance between the man she had trusted and the man standing before her. "My name is Nathaniel Ashbourne." Mrs. Reed's face hardened. Thomas stared at him as though trying to understand a betrayal too large for his age. Eleanor's voice was quiet. "You said Nathan Hale. I needed to observe the village without ceremony. You needed us not to know who was judging us." Malcolm placed a document on the table. It was not the final evacuation order. It authorized compulsory surveys of homes, farms, and burial grounds, allowing engineers to enter private property and prepare for removal. Nathaniel had intended to delay it. But the Crown's representatives were watching, and Malcolm warned that refusal would halt the entire water project while Calder's shortages worsened. Nathaniel signed, believing the survey would give him time to prove the alternative route. The scratch of the pen sounded louder than the protests around him. Eleanor stared at his name on the page. "You let me tell you where every child sleeps. Eleanor, listen to me. So you could draw the water line through their beds. That is not why I stayed. But it is why you came." She placed her father's map in front of him. "You did not come here to understand us." Nathaniel stepped closer, but she moved away. "You came to learn how difficult we would be to remove." By sunrise, every cottage in Alderwick carried a white mark beside its door. The surveyors had worked quickly. Some marks indicated walls to be measured. On the schoolhouse, the line reached above the ground floor windows. On Mrs. Bell's cottage, it crossed the room where her children slept. Eleanor walked through the village with a bucket and brush, covering every mark she found. When Nathaniel approached the ferry landing, she did not stop working. "I have suspended the compulsory survey," he said. "The marks remain. They will be removed." "I am removing them." He stood several feet away, stripped of the ordinary coat in which she had known him. His dark formal clothing, signet ring, and waiting carriage now announced what he had concealed. "I did not sign the evacuation order," he said. "You signed the authority that allowed men into our homes to buy time. You had time before you signed." Nathaniel accepted the blow without defending himself. "I was wrong." Eleanor washed the brush in the river. "Yes, I am ordering a full inspection of the northern. Sir Malcolm controls the engineers. Not all of them. And when they tell you your forest is too valuable?" Nathaniel looked across the river toward the Ashbourne Hills. "Then I will decide whether I believe land can be more valuable than the people beneath the waterline." Eleanor faced him fully. "You have already spent weeks deciding that." She lifted the bucket and walked away. Nathaniel did not follow. For the next several days, Eleanor worked without him. She organized the villagers into small groups. The oldest fishermen recorded past flood levels. Boat builders measured the abandoned channel. Widows brought lease papers showing how little compensation the project offered. Thomas copied names, dates, and boundaries into a single ledger. Eleanor also examined records from the land office. Several farms below Alderwick had been purchased during the previous year by companies with unfamiliar names. Each company led back to the same London contractor responsible for building the reservoir. If Alderwick disappeared beneath the lake, those lower farms would become valuable waterfront property. The project was not merely taking the cheapest route. Someone intended to profit from the destruction. Eleanor brought the documents to the village rector, not to Nathaniel. Yet Nathaniel learned of them before evening. He arrived at the church without guards and waited at the back until Eleanor finished speaking to the residents. "Sir Malcolm approved those purchases," he said when the others had left. "Then your suspicions are only country stories and moss-covered stones." The words were Malcolm's. Nathaniel recognized them. "I deserved that." "You deserve more than embarrassment, I know." Eleanor gathered the papers. "What will you do?" "I have cancelled the survey order and summoned an independent engineer from York. He will inspect both routes before the Crown's hearing. Malcolm will not wait for him." Nathaniel's expression sharpened. "What do you believe he will do?" "Destroy whatever proves my father was right." That night Thomas saw lanterns moving through the northern woods. He ran to Eleanor's cottage, breathless and muddy. "Men near the old channel," he said. They had powder barrels. Eleanor was already reaching for her cloak. The first explosion shook the windows before she reached the road. A dull crack rolled down from the hills. Birds scattered from the trees, and moments later the river began to fall. Not rise. Fall. Eleanor stopped in the middle of the lane. Malcolm's men had broken the bank above the abandoned channel, but they had also released water trapped behind the landslide farther upstream. The sudden drop in Alderwick meant the river was gathering elsewhere again. She knew what would follow. "Ring the church bell," she told Thomas. 3 short, 3 long. Keep ringing until everyone is uphill." The boy ran. Eleanor reached the square as doors began opening. "Leave your furniture," she called. "Take children, medicine, and blankets. Go to the church ridge." A government clerk stepped into her path. Sir Malcolm has issued no warning. The river has. We cannot cause panic on the word of a ferryman's daughter. Nathaniel's voice came from behind him. You will follow Miss Reed's instructions. The clerk turned. Your Grace, official authority is mine, and I am placing it behind hers. Nathaniel faced the gathering villagers. Miss Reed knows this river. Do exactly as she says. Eleanor did not thank him. There was no time. She divided the square quickly. Boat builders were sent to open the old drainage cut near the mill. Stronger villagers carried the elderly toward the ridge while Mrs. Reed led the children to the church. Nathaniel removed his coat. Where do you need me? At the ferry. The main rope must be cut before the surge reaches it or the boat will tear through the lower cottages. He went without argument. The roar arrived as Eleanor reached the mill. The villagers opened the neglected channel just before the first surge struck. Part of the flood diverted through the Ashbourne woods instead of driving directly into Alderwick. Nathaniel severed the ferry rope as the boat twisted against its posts. The current pulled it away, but the cottages behind it remained standing. By dawn, the lower road had disappeared beneath mud and several workshops were damaged. No lives had been lost. Sir Malcolm was arrested before noon. Nathaniel's guards found blasting tools in his carriage and a payment ledger hidden beneath the seat. It recorded the land purchases, the contractor's promises, and the order to destroy the old channel before the independent inspection. The Crown's hearing was moved to Alderwick. Sir Malcolm argued that the explosion had been intended to test the ground and that the flood proved the valley unsafe. Eleanor stood before the officials with her father's map, the villagers' measurements, and the land records. The flood proved the opposite, she said. The old channel carried enough water to protect the village even after it had been neglected for decades. Reinforced properly, it can supply the reservoir without drowning Alderwick. The independent engineer confirmed her findings. 2 routes were placed before the council. The first submerged Alderwick. The second crossed the Ashbourne hunting forest, drained the ornamental lake, and required part of Nathaniel's ancestral estate to be dismantled. One royal advisor looked toward him. Your Grace, the northern plan would cost your family a considerable portion of its income. Yes. It would destroy land held by Ashbourne for more than 200 years. Yes. You would sacrifice your inheritance for one village? Nathaniel looked at Eleanor before answering. No. I would stop calling their sacrifice necessary merely because mine was considered unthinkable. He signed the northern plan. This time, the sound of his pen did not condemn Alderwick. It cut the waterline away from every home in the valley. When the hearing ended, Nathaniel approached Eleanor outside the church. I do not expect this to restore what I broke. It does not, I know. She looked toward the hills where part of his estate would soon be cleared. You lost a great deal today. I finally paid part of the cost I once expected you to bear. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. It was not forgiveness. But for the first time since learning his name, she no longer saw only the man who had come to take her village. She saw a man beginning to understand why it had never been his to take. And several buildings that had stood on the estate for generations were marked for removal. Noblemen who had praised his devotion to public duty now called him reckless, sentimental, and unfit to protect his inheritance. Nathaniel did not reverse the order. For the first time, the cost of progress had been placed upon the man with the greatest power to bear it. At the final council meeting, Nathaniel presented a new charter granting the villagers permanent rights to their homes, fishing grounds, and shared river access. No future reservoir expansion could take their land without the approval of elected representatives from Alderwick. The charter also created a River Wren Council responsible for monitoring water levels, construction safety, and compensation claims. Nathaniel placed the document before Eleanor. I would like you to lead it. She did not touch the papers. Appointed by you, recommended by me. Then removed by the next duke when my decisions become inconvenient. A few officials shifted uneasily, but Nathaniel held her gaze. What would you accept? A council chosen by the people who live beside the river. Its leader must be elected, not rewarded. Nathaniel nodded. Then that is how it will be written. The villagers elected Eleanor 3 weeks later. She accepted the position because it gave Alderwick a voice, not because it placed her close to the Duke. Nathaniel understood the difference. He did not arrive at her door with flowers, jewelry, or promises that one grand sacrifice had erased every lie between them. Instead, he attended council meetings, answered difficult questions, and allowed Eleanor to disagree with him in front of engineers, landowners, and representatives of the crown. When she demanded stronger foundations beneath the northern control gate, he ordered a second inspection. When she rejected compensation figures calculated by officials in London, he required them to speak directly with the families affected. When she told him that his presence frightened several villagers, he stopped arriving with guards. He was learning that trust could not be commanded, even by a duke. Winter passed slowly. Nathaniel's ornamental lake became a wide basin designed to protect both Alderwick and Calder from future floods. The newspapers called it an extraordinary act of noble generosity. Eleanor corrected anyone who repeated the phrase. It was not generosity, she said. It was responsibility. Nathaniel never contradicted her. One cold morning, several months after the hearing, he arrived at the ferry before sunrise. Eleanor was replacing a worn rope along the eastern post. Mist covered the river, and the village windows remained dark behind her. "You are early," she said. "I was told the eastern rope required attention." That was months ago. I assumed Rivers continued damaging ropes after apologies had been made. She looked at him, uncertain whether to be amused. He wore an ordinary dark coat, though no disguise could now make him Nathan Hale again. The man who had hidden his name no longer existed between them. Eleanor stepped into the ferry and held out her hand for the fare. Nathaniel placed a coin in her palm. "Full price?" he asked. "You are no longer an injured surveyor." "I was never a surveyor." "That explains the knots." They crossed in silence at first. The river moved peacefully beneath the boat, reflecting the pale light gathering above the hills. Nathaniel watched the village recede behind them. "The first time I crossed this river, I lied about who I was." "You omitted the truth." "That was the lie." Eleanor rested one hand on the oar. "I trusted you." "I know. You listened while I told you what losing Alderwick would do to us. Then you stood inside our church and signed your authority over our homes." "I know." There was no defense in his voice. Nathaniel had once believed a careful explanation could soften what he had done. Now he understood that remorse did not require Eleanor to make his guilt easier to carry. "I do not expect you to forget it," he continued. "I am not asking you to believe that giving up part of my estate made me worthy of forgiveness." "Then what are you asking?" He looked directly at her. "Whether I may return with my real name and earn whatever place you decide I deserve." Eleanor studied the man before her. She remembered the stranger who had ignored her warning, the duke who had betrayed her trust, and the landowner who had finally allowed his own inheritance to bear the burden he had once placed upon the poor. He had changed, but she had learned not to build trust from one brave moment. The ferry reached the opposite bank. Nathaniel stepped onto the landing, but Eleanor stopped him before he could walk away. She lifted the second oar from beneath the seat and offered it to him. "Come tomorrow before sunrise." He accepted it carefully. "What happens tomorrow?" "You begin learning how to tie a rope properly." A quiet smile appeared on his face. "I will be here." The next morning, Nathaniel returned without a carriage, guards, or official documents. He came carrying the oar. Eleanor was already waiting at the river. Their love did not begin because she had once saved a duke from the flood, nor because he had later saved her village from destruction. It began when he finally understood that loving Eleanor meant standing beside her without deciding her future for her. And when she saw that he was willing to keep returning not as the man who ruled the valley, but as the man prepared to share its burden, she allowed him to stay.